recording, or can you start recording? You are recording already. Okay, great. So welcome everybody to the Legislative Subcommittee of the Oregon Public Records Advisory Council, October 20th. We have a pretty short and continued focused agenda. I'll just read it through so we can approve it. I also first just wanted to say thanks to everybody for all the work that got done last week when I was gone. Yay, it was great to come back to. I haven't been able to see the meeting because the recording hasn't been rendered, I think is the right word yet, but I got briefed on it by Todd, so and read the document. So thank you, everybody. The agenda today is to keep on discussing our revised legislative proposals. Hopefully we can work through the non-public interest concepts and then return to the public interest concepts. We did designate this meeting as a time to bring specific language to the public interest concepts in that first version that Steve had put out a couple weeks ago. So we'll try to get some time to for sure do that, presuming that people are prepared and okay with that. And we'll have some time for public comment, and then we will try to wrap up 10 minutes before the end. Our scheduled time is to end at 4:30 to look at the calendar and make sure we're on track with our goals. So everybody approve? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, great. All in favor of approving the agenda or any revisions to it? Okay.
Aye.
Okay, great. Okay, and it looks like we have plenty of folks. Michael Crone just popped on and popped off. So, Steve, was that a question, a hand up, or?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. We had sort of designated today to talk about the public interest at least, and we have leftover non-public interest from last week. Do we want to maybe set a time limit for, if we're going to discuss the leftover material from last week, do we want to set a time limit for that, or do we want to do public interest first and see what time is left over available for the remainders?
That's a great question. I think we should definitely try to get to both of them today. Let's take the next 30 minutes and see what we can get through on the non-public interest concepts. It seemed like there was a lot of discussion that already happened last week, even without necessarily agreement. And then at 3:30, let's assess and then plan to try to move to public interest at that point. Does that sound reasonable to people? Yeah, okay. Okay, so, again, acknowledging that I wasn't here and haven't been able to actually watch the meeting, but I'm looking at the document, which is the revising ORS 192, et cetera. Agreed upon concepts is in yellow, which is basically, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong here, but is Steve's plain language approach to some non-public interest concepts, with the parts that people agreed on, language agreed on in the last meetings highlighted in yellow. Is that correct?
Correct, although then it's slightly amended in that it also includes a few things from Steve's concept that weren't caught from mine that I added at the end. So it's mostly Steve's, parts we agreed to in yellow, and then at the very end are the few things that I thought we need to still talk about from my concept.
Okay, that fit into these different sections.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I know you just posted a public comment with some suggested language from Alan Kessler that addresses, I think, the sections that you got through and talked about a lot, but didn't conclude. So we'll start with those. But yeah, Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to be sure that while we're doing this, that we're working all from the same document. And if that document could be shared with this on the screen, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sure, let me try to do that. So it's posted as well. So it's called Revising ORS 192.311-329 _ agreed upon concepts in yellow. And I will.
And Emily, I just dropped the link to it in our chat as well.
Oh, thank you. That's great. I will share my screen. I will share my screen here. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. When I share my screen, I have trouble seeing the rest of you. So let me see. Oh, I'm back. Okay. You can still see my screen? Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Okay, so let's,
Emily,
yeah,
can you zoom in a little bit on your screen?
I can, probably. Is
Yeah, that.
that better?
Great, much better. Thank you.
Legible? Okay. So we got through the search, duplicate, and review definition of what can be charged for. And could I ask somebody who was here to summarize where we were on the combination of how costs must be itemized, communication to reduce costs, and communication to promote requesters' rights? Steve, you have your hand up. Are you in a position to do that?
Yeah, I'll try. And so on the itemization of costs, I think there were concerns raised that this would be a mandate on governments that could be costly and could have a fiscal impact. And feeling among some requesters or some people that it might not provide useful information, or not every requester might need this information or want it. So we did not really reach an agreement on that. And then on communication to promote requesters' rights, there was not a lot of discussion of that. I think we decided to move on because time was short. I did want to propose, unless anybody has, if I'm missing something, maybe somebody can point it out, but I did want to propose kind of maybe a potential way of addressing these two sections. I think in both cases, when we're talking about cost itemization and then some of these concepts that Todd crafted to, on communication, they're both forms of communication, trying to provide information from the public body to the requester so that the requester can formulate a better request or a narrower request. I think that's the thrust of all this, or to understand what the cost is. Alan Kessler, who spoke about this toward the end of our last meeting, offered up 2 paragraphs of language that I think would address both. And I think his proposal gives the public body more flexibility in the manner in which they supply the information. It gives the requester the option to ask for an item, not an itemization, but information that would clarify the reason something costs what it costs. So it may offer a way forward that would encapsulate both of these sections. And the proposal that I have under this week's agenda, I would withdraw regardless. I think his does the trick. So maybe it's worth discussing.
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand right. Steve, you are suggesting that in the highlighted in yellow document that's on my screen, how costs must be itemized and the communication to reduce costs segment could both be scrapped in favor of the Kessler proposed language, which maybe is on your screens now. I just switched browser tabs. Do you guys see that? That's what's shared. So just this line, a requester who has been notified of the fee of the public body, like that would cover those 2 segments.
Emily, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we switch to the posted version of this document because it contains redacted information that has the redactions in them?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I don't have that up though.
I'll drop the link to you.
Okay. Okay, this is this the correct one?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. So Steve, is this what you're proposing? It would be this, I'll zoom in a bit too, be this language from a requester?
Yes.
This language would be replace the both sections communicating how costs must be itemized and communicating to reduce costs. Yeah, am I understanding you right?
Yeah. I mean, it offers a lot less of this extensive guidance on ways, on mechanisms that could be helpful to the requester. I think all of what Todd has proposed is helpful, but the greater succinctness of what Alan is proposing gets at one form of communication with the requester that could be helpful, and it might be small enough of a chunk for us to bite off.
Okay, I'm going to ask Michael he's got his hand up to comment, and then let's take a couple minutes after that comment and just so everybody has a chance to actually reread both segments, so it's fresh in our discussion. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I prefer Mr. Kessler's language too. I think that it could be a little bit shortened even more. I think you can just say a requester has been notified of a fee under ORS, and we don't need the public body considers bit to be in there. But I like this in general. I kind of like what's in Todd's about narrowing, which isn't really covered by this, so I would suggest maybe that's a thing we want to talk about. But otherwise, I think what Kessler has suggested here makes a lot more sense to me than what was initially proposed.
Okay, so you've got to jump and you've read them all and know what you want to say. So let's take just a few minutes, if everybody wouldn't mind, to refresh your memory, and that's especially giving me some time to read these sections. And when you talk about the narrowing segment, Michael, that is where in the documents we're looking at right now, or is that not? Has that been dropped somehow? Like, where is that?
I'm sorry. In Todd's, it's in the. Well, it's hard to know on your screen. I think it's above where you are. It's got a number. Hold on. It's in communications to reduce costs. It's under, I guess, 4C, and I think that is actually useful, but I guess I don't really know if there's any examples of people refusing to do that. So I don't know, maybe it's not important, but that's the one piece that I think isn't really in Kessler's proposal that I kind of liked about what's in here.
Right, it has the good faith part. Okay, let's take a couple minutes if everybody doesn't mind, and I'm going to read them on my screen so you can follow along, but you can also, access them yourselves. Okay, I'm done reading. Is everybody else done reading, or want more time? Todd?
Well, I accidentally gave a thumbs up, which did mean I was done reading, but I was actually trying to raise my hand, so I guess it all worked out.
Okay.
If we're ready, I just want to offer my comments or observations to get us started. So I realize this is a statute, not like a presentation or a legal argument, and also that we're trying to create the narrowest type of proposal that would likely to get passed in the legislature while effectuating meaningful change for requesters and public bodies. That being said, I see these concepts as linked and important to keep together. There's sort of a through line here. The majority of us agreed that public bodies should now have to estimate their costs based on the elements of review, I'm already forgetting them, but you know what I'm talking about, review, duplication, and search. And so even now, a public body has to estimate its costs so that it could then pass on those costs to a requester. So if we're going to try to go forward with this scheme where they now have to do it based on these three elements and would have to do that for themselves first to determine how they're going to pass on these costs to the requester, I'm not sure how much more work a public body would then have to do to provide that detail to the requester when giving them their fee estimate. I understand there may be some additional work creating fee estimates that match the itemization of these three elements, but I'm not sure it would be a heavy or overburdensome load that they would have to do. And if the flip side of that is creating common language and understanding between public bodies and requesters to talk about how these costs are comprised, I think the benefits outweigh the cost. And if having the elements of cost broken down this way are linked to itemization, I think the third chain link in that chain, and which is an important concept to retain, is requirements to communicate around cost and other issues. And while I wouldn't say I dislike Alan's suggestion, I think if we want to go for a more simpler way for public bodies to have to engage with requesters over issues, I could support Alan's version of that, but I would want to specifically call out electronic records. That is the new frontier that we were all working in. We don't necessarily have to drill down to specific types of electronic medium, but I think as more and more of our work migrates onto these platforms and public bodies are struggling with understanding their own systems and how to communicate that information to requesters, I think it's really important we make clear that they need to do so when attempting to clarify requests, including around electronic records. And some of the specifics that do go into public electronic records around things like data dictionaries or other terms of art that I think are going to be with us for a while. So I'm in favor of potentially including Alan's with some changes, but I'm also in favor of keeping the requirement that fee estimates be itemized.
I'm going to just change my screen sharing here. So sorry if it gets strange on your screen so you can see both documents side by side. Tyler, were you putting your hand up? I'd love to hear from some of the agency, city government folks.
I inadvertently had my hand up, but I can chime in if you'd like me to. Yeah, I like Mr. Kessler's simplicity and his approach here. I think this is sort of gets to the gist of what we've been talking about, which is, when asked by a requester, a public body should have to provide some more information about, okay, here's how we calculated this sum. And I think it dovetails nicely with the work we did last week on search, duplication, and review. I'm fine if there's a little bit of language added in there about electronic records, just specifying that. Overall, I think this is the gist of where we're going, and I think I like this a little more than Todd's original approach on those two sections. The more I was thinking about it particularly, and I don't know if you can scroll down, Emily, but it's the section after the how costs must be itemized. It was the communication to reduce costs. The more I was thinking about, B, C, and D, the more I was thinking that this could be cracking a door open to sort of vexatious, ongoing requests. If somebody's trying to, go in and they don't like the answer that they've got or the explanation on the fee, they might then ask about, okay, what's the metadata? What's the, how is this recognized? And suddenly we're sucking up time and losing efficiency. So I think that Mr. Kessler's is a good first step. And again, I think it works really well with what we did last week in terms of giving requesters and public bodies the same language from which they're speaking.
One thing I like about the, just not seeing any hands, I'll chime in here, about the, like the B, C, and D, which are on the screen now under the communication to reduce costs, go into a lot of detail. The thing that I think overall I'd like to see us finesse into something is this good faith working with each other. That is something that I think happens, but the problems, the tensions come up when it doesn't happen. So I wonder if that's something we could somehow keep in there. But I don't know that it needs to go into such detail about email and database, but I agree, Todd, that, you know, giving a clear direction in electronic records is probably important as we're looking forward. Emily, you had your hand up.
I like Kessler's language. One of the concerns that I have about, well, primarily D, I think it is, and but also C, is that you know, subject lines and well, really, actually, it's mostly the emails. Subject lines of emails and senders and recipients could potentially still be information that has to be reviewed and redacted. And depending on the volume of the request, that could be a lot. And so that is requiring the public body to do a bunch of work to help them narrow their request. I don't know. I have some concerns about that.
Sometimes that happens now, but it might not be right to necessarily spell it out. And, you know, like I've dealt with public bodies that they're like, well, can I get you this section and let's see, you know, what you really want from it. But maybe this, I hear you that maybe this goes into too much depth. Let's see who's got their hands up. Did Michael have, or Todd, you had your hand up next, I think.
I think so. I will just say, Emily, that, you know, it is kind of a best practice to recommend working with requesters when it comes to email on things like records custodians, timeframes, keywords, because that actually can help narrow the process. I can understand your concern about making it an affirmative obligation, but that's why I think good faith, if we utilize the good faith language in any version of these, it gives the public body the ability to say, well, actually, in fact, you know, we can't disclose this because of existing exemptions, workload requirements, what have you. But to dovetail with that, I wanted to say that in whichever concept we use, I actually am in favor of keeping that a public body has to respond or deny the ability, like the request for this underlying information. Let's say we're talking about trade secrets, proprietary software, what have you. Maybe good faith is enough to cover that, but I kind of like making it clear to public bodies that, hey, actually, yeah, you have this duty to communicate, but when necessary, you're perfectly permitted to deny as well if, you know, if you're following the law. And so I don't want that to be sort of lost in the shuffle about what public bodies think they're being told to do here.
Michael?
Sorry, I'm having trouble navigating my mute button today. So I just to sort of respond, I guess, to the things that have been said. I think that having a good faith requirement, at least maybe for requests over a certain threshold, that if the requester in good faith asks the public body to help narrow a request, that the public body has a good obligation to try and do that in good faith if they can. I think anything that goes beyond that just becomes way too prescriptive. You know, with respect to the metadata or the other types of electronic sort of attachments to data, those are in themselves public records, and a public records requester who wants them can request them, and then the public body is required to grant or deny that request. I don't think we need to call it out separately here, and I think if we just have a good faith requirement to help someone who's also trying in good faith to like get a manageable request that gets them what they need is really what we want.
Okay. Great, thanks, Michael. Tyler?
Oh, from talking to a few of my members, I feel like one thing that was flagged for me was that a good faith requirement does invite a lot of litigation. I think it's similar to reasonable. It's in the eye of the beholder. So just a flag there. Something that I've heard from my members.
How do you deal with that then? Like, what's the answer? Because yeah, that's true. Reasonable can be interpreted. Good faith can be interpreted. But to try to like encourage, you know, positive communication between requesters, which is something we've heard is really important and successful from people, you know, with all kinds of experience around public records. Like, let's see, what's another approach, do you think?
Well, I think we've tackled the first part. If we go with what we've adopted last week, and we have at least clarified like a similar framework for what you are allowed to charge with. If we're going with search, duplication, and review, hopefully that eases, you know, if we go with something like Mr. Kessler's language, which says the public body has to respond when asked, you know, how did you come up with this number? And then we can look back at the statute, and both the requester and the public body can look at that statute and say, okay, I'm allowed to charge search, duplication, and review. Maybe we've cracked that nut.
I was sorry. I thought you were talking about good faith in terms of helping narrow.
Let me think on that one.
Sorry. Okay. I see Mindy Lane, your hand up. I just want to keep going with the council for a minute before we get to public comment. What I think I'm hearing is some coalescing around using the language that Mr. Kessler provided, but keeping in possibly, you know, one line about working together in good faith to narrow requests. And Todd, you felt it was important to, and I'm not totally clear myself on where this would go, but that the public body, you know, should close it or deny it, be clear about that communication. So I'm not quite sure where that fits in, but those are the two pieces I'm hearing. Maybe we want to fold in, but move toward Mr. Kessler's language instead. I see some hands going up. So Mark.
So I do have a question because, and honestly, I'm a little confused, which I've described to you before. Shouldn't be surprising to you all. Are we? I understand we're considering the language that was forwarded by Mr. Kessler. Forgive me. I have COVID, so I'm trying to get through this. Are we talking also about the communication to reduce costs and incorporating a sentence or two into this while dropping B, C, and D from this? I'm trying to understand really what it is we're trying to achieve here. I would love to be able to condense B, C, and D into one sentence if it was possible, because I frankly look at it and it makes my eyes glaze over. And I've got COVID, which is kind of tough. All right. So if that's the direction we're working towards, I'm comfortable with that. If we're talking about Kessler language on top of B, C, and D, I'm beginning to feel even more wheezy. So that's my comment.
We're talking about the Kessler language to replace this, how costs must be itemized largely. And then what I think I'm hearing is largely what you've just summarized, Mark, and this Kessler language also replaces 4A under communication to reduce costs. But this B, C, and D, what I'm hearing is this idea to consolidate it, you know, keep some language about narrowing and good faith, and you know, when you're going to deny a request, deny it. Does that help clarify? Okay, I'm really sorry that you have COVID. Let's see, Steve, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to echo that. That's my understanding, that I envision the Kessler language replacing the itemization language, and then I think what people are saying is they would like to have some sort of good faith language that would replace B, C, and D under communication. And I think you could sort of echo the Kessler language in saying a requester may seek additional information from the public body that may help to narrow their request, and the public body shall, in that situation, work in good faith to provide the information.
So also very simple.
Something much broader than these very specific terms, which personally, like, I think it's helpful to have the specific terms because it lays out kind of a roadmap for people, and it's also all may rather than prescriptive. But moving beyond that, I think where the consensus lies is like broad guidance is better. So I think we could do it in one or two sentences.
I mean, I don't know if some of this could be lifted into guidance, for example, that Todd's office might provide to the public, like as examples or things like that. Todd?
I was just going to say, while I support using Alan's language to replace the sections that we currently have labeled communication to reduce costs and communication to promote requesters' rights, I think. Actually, but that's not true. I'm sorry. Just Alan's language to replace communication to reduce costs. I do not support using it to replace the itemization of fee estimates. I think if public bodies are going to be required to be breaking down fees into this way, I don't see why they shouldn't be conveying that information to requesters when they provide fee estimates and when they provide final bills. I just think it adds to communication, continues with this establishment of a common language, and lays the groundwork for better public records requests. But I do support utilizing Alan's language with some of the changes we said here to replace communication to reduce costs. Okay,
and the difference is, like, the how costs must be itemized, and the Kessler language is, first of all, this means in how costs must be itemized, the public body has to do it, not wait for a request. And it's really specific in what the public body has to provide. You were saying that you can't see that if we're going to go with this language of search, duplicate, and review, you can't see that it's going to be any more work to say the number of hours worked on search, duplicate, or review and the compensation. And I'm curious, like, from public bodies, is that true? Like, what would it be additional work? Obviously, there's a difference between needing to do something when you provide the fee estimate and waiting for a request for a breakdown, because you might not always get a request for a breakdown. But would you need to go through all these steps of figuring out the number of hours worked in each activity and the hourly compensation of the lowest paid employee? Would you need to go through that to figure out your bottom line fee anyway that you're going to give to the person?
Right, Emily, if I could just also add to the rest of that thought. Sorry, Mark. You know, the communication piece we're working on, including the language submitted by Alan, I think is more about sort of understanding how a public body organizes and names and maintains its records, so a requester can more effectively ask for specific records instead of feeling like they need to say any and all, or being really broad or vague, and encouraging them to speak with the public body, and frankly, encouraging the public body to answer them back. But, you know, when it comes to public bodies, already need to provide fee estimates to requesters, and they need to do so with an understanding of what their costs will be. And so when they provide a fee estimate to a requester, it should be reflective of the work they did behind the scenes. Now, remember, a fee estimate is just a fee estimate, right? It's not buying on the public body to the extent that if it does less work, it refunds the money. And if it's going to be more expensive, it asks for additional payment of fees. So if they're doing all that work anyway, and they have to also provide a requester with a fee estimate, and if they don't collect all the fees at the time that they provide the fee estimate and need to provide a requester with a final bill, then I'm not sure where the heavy lift is. And again, I don't want to disrespect frontline staff members who do this work every day, but I'm not sure how this adds a really large additional cost to just push out the information they've already had to compile for themselves. And I don't think the communication suggestions from Alan get to this issue.
And I think just to follow up, I think Todd basically made the point. You know, if a fee is going to exceed $25, folks, you have to provide the estimate to the requester, right? If you don't have a sense for what the heck it is you're charging for, it's a guess, and you should be able to document this. You should be able to do it as a receipt, as Todd said. If it took more time or it took additional review, you know, the price or the charge is going to be different. You should be able to itemize it. So I thanks for explaining that, Todd, because I don't know if it really does create a new burden. To the extent that it's going to create a whole lot more work. I don't think that it does, particularly for those jobs that are over $25.
Thank you both. I'm noting that we're past my 3:30 deadline to talk about this, but let's go through the comments and see if we can't come to a decision on at least this section and then move on to the public interest stuff that's remaining. Let's see, I think, Scott, you had your hand up next.
I think Steve had his hand raised before me.
Okay, Steve. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I guess in the interest of time, I did envision Kessler's language replacing how costs must be itemized, because I thought from last week that there were concerns about how costs must be itemized. But if people are comfortable with it, I certainly support it as Todd crafted it. And if public bodies feel that it is work that they're already doing, then I think we should move forward. I would move that we take a vote on the language as written rather than the Kessler language.
I'm sorry, I'm uncomfortable with as written, Steve. Forgive me for going out of line. And if we do it in a parliamentary way, I'll explain my concerns, because I think Michael Crone had some very important suggestions to this language that I think would improve it and shorten it.
Mark, I'm sorry, I didn't understand whether you're talking about concerns with as written, the how costs must be itemized in the language in I guess it's Steve's document, but the one that's on the screen in front of you that's the one you have concerns with as written? What exactly is the language you have concerns with as written?
Well, Steve is the one who basically pushed for a vote on the language as written. And I don't think I'm prepared at this point, because Michael Crone made a suggestion that I thought made a lot of sense. And that was shortening this by basically referencing where a public body can charge people by statute, and then continuing on with the language. I think some of this language is a little bit confusing. Nevertheless, go ahead.
Mark, are you talking about the how costs must be itemized section, or are you talking about this communication to reduce costs ABCD section? Which section? Because Michael's suggestion was talking about the communication to reduce costs.
I thought that Steve was asking for a vote on the Kessler language.
No, I was asking for a vote on the language that's on the screen here. Todd has said he feels it's important that we keep a cost itemization requirement. Kessler's proposal was an alternative to that. It's not an itemization requirement. It's upon request shall provide some information about costs, so less prescriptive. So if people are comfortable with an itemization, that's Todd's preferred direction, and I say we see whether that support exists.
Let's see what the temperature is here for just this section of how costs must be itemized, which is written in bold. The fee starts with the fee components of search, duplicating, review, versus the how costs must be itemized, versus the Kessler language of requesting an explanation for the basis of the fee. Can I get hand raises on how many people would be more comfortable? And I'm not talking about this communication to reduce cost stuff at all. Just talking about how costs must be itemized, whether it's a list that comes with the fee estimate, or whether it is information that's provided a reasonable, sufficient detail to allow a reasonable person to understand, that's provided upon request. Could we just go around and can people say whether they prefer the itemization or the upon request?
I'd like to hear from Scott before we do that. He's had his hand up for a while, and I'm curious what his thoughts are on it.
Thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate. I do think there's a consensus building here. To me, I don't see this as a burden on frontline staff. I think a good best practice public records officer has already been doing this. And if you're going to be charging a fee, you're already writing this calculation, so releasing it. We have a standard form that has those exact number of hours and the cost per hour. We already do that, and I can't speak for every city in the state of Oregon, but I think a lot of us already have that. So I'm not super worried about it. I think the final comments before I started talking was narrowing down. This is a difference between, do we provide it up front or do we wait to be asked for it? frankly, if I am not having to do it up front, I think I'll continue to provide it up front because I still think that's the best practice. So if I had to choose between these two right now, I honestly was thinking which way would I vote, because I have no real major concerns with either in either direction, because I don't think it would stop me and a good number of cities from providing it for the request we have to ask for fees for. We're already going to provide that information anyway because we have to run the calculation anyway. So I'm sorry to have to sit on the fence on this one. I could get behind either. And I appreciate that there is a consensus, I think, hope building towards it. And thank you.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like actually there's a lot of could go either way. So I'll put you in both columns, Scott. And Emily, did you have another comment besides wanting to just check, make sure that you heard Scott's comments before expressing your opinion?
No, I'm a little bit on the fence too. So that's part of why I wanted to hear from Scott.
Okay, great. Todd, I think you're in the upfront column.
Yes, itemization, please.
Okay, let's see, Tyler.
Are we talking about the two documents here and which one we're going with?
Yeah, we're talking about this idea of whether an agency needs to itemize costs when they provide the fee estimate, or which is in the language in bold, or whether an agency would need to provide, it's much less specific language about exactly what they would need to provide, but need to provide sufficient detail to permit a reasonable person to understand the purpose of the fee only upon request.
Is that good faith standard part of the vague language?
No, the good faith standard has actually just been in a different set, like it's written right now in a different component of communication about narrowing requests. The Kessler language, which is in the email document, was really, from what I understand, drafted in response to concerns that were raised at the last meeting about itemizing costs up front. And now it seems like maybe that people have thought through that a little bit differently. So where are we landing on agencies doing itemization up front with their fee estimate when they're, when they are required to provide a fee estimate, or whether they would need to, they would only itemize upon request?
It's been, I mean, I'm looking at, frankly, I'm struggling because I'm looking at the fact that, we have the alternative before us, which came in today at noon, and I've been hearing from members who are concerned about it. If I was forced to go with one or the other, I think the upfront makes sense. I share Todd's assessment that from what I understand, public bodies are doing that work up front, so they can just provide that. And I don't think that it adds as much as of an administrative burden.
Okay. Who have I not talked to? Steve?
Michael's got his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I just want to make it clear. I think there is some administrative burden in this itemization, but my real primary objection to it is that I don't really think it's useful. Like, I have never had a requester ask me, well, how much of this is time you're going to spend duplicating versus searching versus reviewing the records? What Alan's language to me allows requesters to do that is much more useful is ask, well, what is it that I'm asking you for that is so expensive? And therefore, I just feel like it actually serves a useful purpose as opposed to being just kind of like a bureaucratic line item. We don't currently break our bills down this way. I don't know how easily we could start doing that versus not. I mean, it may be that it's correct that it's a minor administrative burden, but my real thing about it is I just don't think it adds that much value, because it's not a question I've ever been asked by anyone requesting public records.
Okay. So if you had to go in one column or the other, it sounds like you would go in the wait until the asked column.
And then be required to explain it in a way that is actually like going to help them understand what's actually going on and understanding the cost. Yeah, to me, that's much more useful.
Okay. Mark, where would you land on this?
Well, aside from the fact that at the last meeting, I thought we had dispensed of this component of the itemization, I'm far more supportive of the Kessler approach. For the reasons stated by Michael, you know, honestly, we had dispensed of this itemization last week, but now we're back to it, and that's fine. That's fine. If you're asking me which of the two I prefer, Emily, it is the Kessler approach.
Okay. My understanding is this particular piece of it wasn't actually decided in the last meeting, this whether to itemize or not. So obviously wasn't here, but this is what I understand. What I understand was approved was this search, duplicate, and review as being the things you can charge for. So Steve, where did you land, one column or the other?
I could support either. I think really it's a matter of what's going to fly. I think I guess I'd like to hear from Todd. What about the Kessler proposal is lacking in terms of the type of cost information that we want for requesters to be able to have it in your proposal?
Fair question, Steve. You know, it puts the burden on the requester to understand what its government is doing when the government is already compiling this information for its own purposes. So a requester, to Michael's point, may not know to ask these kinds of questions. Well, how long did it take to search? Why did it take you a month to search? They may not understand because they come to us at differing levels of authority and knowledge about the public records law, their government operations, what records are called, what kinds of records are held, trust in government, that they may not know they can ask, might not be willing to ask, but if they start with this initial common language with the public body that gives them a bare bone understanding as to what the basis of these fees are, that can help them, one, not have to take an affirmative duty to start asking these questions, but rather have this information provided to them, and two, have a better understanding of what they're looking at so they could start asking more sophisticated questions about, well, what does search consist of? You know, why does it take so long to duplicate? Why does your attorney need to review this information for what looks like really basic redactions? I think it levels the playing field a little bit and takes the burden off requesters who are essentially receiving a government service from having to like take this action and first start asking questions. I think it's great that communication recommendations generally will perhaps follow Alan's language, but I think when you're being asked to pay for a service, when I get a gas bill, it's not just like a block line, it's not a line that just says, hey, pay $100 or whatever. It breaks down my usage over the month in like painstaking detail. I don't see why this government service where the government is already compiling this information shouldn't then be translated or transmitted to the requester when they're being asked to pay for this very same information.
Yeah, I wasn't anticipating this what's gonna take so long. I'm curious as to like what if we took out the specificity of what the estimates and statements needed to include, although it wouldn't be like a gas bill if you did that, and I appreciate that detail, but and instead use language like sufficient detail to understand the amount and purpose. You use some of the language from Kessler's suggestion to putting it in there. I'm wondering if that might be helpful. I see some hands up though. So Tyler.
I should have brought this up earlier as well, but I actually, being there last week, I also was on the understanding that we were tabling these two sections. I'm just recognizing the lateness of the hour, what we have set out for ourselves as a 28th deadline. I think for whatever it's worth, we might be well served in starting to figure out what are we trying to bite off in 2023 and what are we tabling for this group's continued work. And the fact that we're getting so bogged down in this maybe means we should move on to where we have more unanimity.
Michael? Michael Crone, did you still have your hand up?
I forgot to take it down. I'm sorry.
Okay. What seems to be, I don't think want to go straight into like, what do we want to get done in 2023 right now? But just to be clear, my understanding going into this meeting was not that this had been tabled. So I apologize if people feel like they were coming into a discussion that they thought had been taken care of, but that is not what was communicated to me. That is not what the record shows here, because of what was highlighted in yellow is what was agreed on, and the rest was available to just our next steps.
But Emily, it was discussed, okay? And I'm sorry you didn't see the meeting, and I'm not trying to be problematic, but this item was discussed, and the group decided to table it. I'm
Mark,
happy to return to it.
To not interrupt when other people are talking, and that includes me and other people. What was communicated to me was it was discussed robustly, and we were going to return to it to try to come to some conclusions. All right. I think that my sense is that at this point we don't need to spend more time on it, but we can possibly come up with some language outside of this meeting that could be potentially acceptable to people looking at an entire package. It really seems like there's not a strong consensus either way. A lot of people are down the middle, which actually bodes well for progress. So I think we should move on. We should plan to do that, and we should move on to the other items of public interest. Steve, you have your hand up?
Briefly, I will own some of this in terms of this confusion over what was tabled and not tabled. I was fully supportive of tabling both of these sections at the last meeting, and I think we did. That was kind of the consensus of the group. Also, at the end of the meeting, we had testimony from Alan suggesting a different way forward, and so I knew that we were going to be talking about all the rest of things that we hadn't addressed last week today, and so I brought this forward in an attempt to try and capture whatever consensus could still be salvaged from this. But I agree with it, that I think we're past that. Like, I think it's time to move on, and you know, we could spend a lot of time trying to get to just the right thing. I don't think we're going to get there. So,
okay, Mark, did you have another comment? And then Todd.
Yeah, forgive me for interrupting, Emily. I wanted the record to be clear, okay? And again, I'm still willing to talk about Kessler because Kessler's language, but I want to do for the good of the order and move on as the chair wants to move. But I sincerely do apologize for interrupting you. Forgive me.
No problem. That's really generous of you to apologize. Thank you. And I didn't mean to call you out so directly, but it's really difficult to run a meeting if people are interrupting. And I think people who speak feel the same way, who aren't running the meeting. Todd, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so first of all, my apologies, because I was under the impression that we concluded last week's meeting by merely saying we couldn't get to those items last week, and so the continuation, or we would continue the discussion this week, which is why it's still there, and anything that we had agreed to veto, either permanently or for this session, I would have crossed out. But I thought it was just tabled until this week, which is why it's still there and it's still being discussed, and obviously it's an item of contention. However, I do think we have general agreement around the next two sections and could possibly get to those today. Communication to reduce costs. We seem to be moving in favor of Alan's language with maybe a few modifications. And communication to promote requesters' rights was, I think, almost universally agreed to last time. Have a written policy, put it on your website if it exists, and if you don't do that, you can't charge fees. So I actually feel like we could get to those two sections. And then, of course, that leaves if we want to keep itemization or not, and then dealing with public interest for next time, presumably.
Okay, you're saying we should just leave public interest till next time?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to deal with these next two sections that we could agree with, and maybe then just go for a vote on itemization, and then next time it's only public interest, it might be doable if that works for everybody.
I think that would make more sense time-wise. I know that some folks are here, like we are prepared to talk about the public interest stuff, but is there any objections to taking the path that Todd's laid out? Mark? Steve?
Well, I'd like to see if we could get a sense right up front whether there is in fact support for language as written for B, C, and D under communication and the website stuff. Because my recollection is that there are differing opinions on this, and so It'd be good to know right off the bat, like how close are we really?
All right, I've reshared my screen to show that. So that is this section, the communication to reduce costs. Okay, so what I was hearing, we can do an up and down vote. What I was hearing was this is too much detail, but let's put in something like what was in Mr. Kessler's language about like, well, sorry, it was not in that language, but a requester can, if a requester is seeking information that they can help narrow it, that the public body shall work in good faith to do that. So maybe that was something, Michael, you came up with, but I was hearing some ideas of consolidating these B, C, and D into much more broad language like that. So if we can do a quick temperature take on the idea of, I'm just looking back at A, if there's anything different that's specific in here. Expediting.
Emily?
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone saw, but I did post something in the chat a while ago, and maybe that's a useful thing to just kind of get people to put a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the screen to that language, and maybe that's a good.
Okay. Is this okay? So this is proposed language, Michael, for this communication.
Yeah, it's mostly Kessler's. I took a little piece out that just felt like it was unnecessary to me, and that was the part that talked about the fee that the public body considers to be permitted. I think by giving the fee, the public body is saying they consider it to be permitted, so we could cut that part out entirely. But the only other thing I did then was add the sentence at the end of the first paragraph saying a public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee.
Okay, so you're suggesting this, that one sentence, and up and down vote on that in replacing the paragraphs in 4.
Just the one sentence?
Is that right? Because the other stuff.
We could do that too. I'm happy. I just wanted clarity.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I suggest that, Michael, is because the first 2 sentences in what you put in the chat deal with waiting for a request versus requiring an itemized receipt, which is what we've been having different opinions about. So, so can we take can people do a thumbs up or thumbs down on this idea of a public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request? I don't know about the in order to reduce fee. I guess that's the only reason you'd narrow a request. But is that sufficient language to replace B, C, and D in section 4? Mark is yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Please.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to just find that sentence. Where is it?
That's the chat in the
yeah, I'm in the chat, and I'm looking at Michael Crone at 3:36 p.m.
Yeah, so scroll down to the last sentence in the first long paragraph. A public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee.
Oh, I see it. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes, I'm perfectly fine with this. Thank you.
That would replace
yes
communication to reduce costs.
Yes, and that would get us this whole thing that we spent 2 hours on already dealt with. No, okay. No, I'm fine with that. So.
Okay. What it would do, Mark, is it would replace this communication to reduce costs, which is is not about an itemized receipt for fees. It's a different section right below, which you should be able to see on the screen. Tyler?
I'm tracking. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Tyler, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm just I'm working my way through this last sentence of it. I get what we're trying to accomplish. I'm on board with the gist of where we're taking this. Essentially saying a public body have to communicate back and forth to a reasonable standard, like working in good faith. But my question is, where does it end? Is there any sort of safe harbor that we can offer a public body? I am very nervous about, again, good faith being in the eye of the beholder, and I think we've circled all the way back around to reasonable being a really nebulous term.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would share Tyler's concern here because those nebulous words such as good faith do make our people nervous as well. So I can confirm, at least from the district's perspective, that we share those concerns with the counties about that sort of nebulous terminology. So if there is a way to create a way to shut the process down, that would be helpful.
Steve?
I think the reason for terms like good faith is to avoid terms like shall, like shall do this. I think it gives you more of an out than a punishment. That's my sense, but I think maybe Michael or Todd could speak to that more effectively. Actually, Michael, since these are his words.
Emily had his hand up.
I was just going to say, I don't know specifically what I would propose, but like, I wonder if there's anything that the Office of the Public Records Advocate could serve in, like, if like the parties needed guidance on whether they had done enough to reasonably work in good faith to narrow a request.
Okay, thanks. Michael, do you want to speak to it, since, as Steve pointed out, is your language?
I mean, I don't really have much to add that Steve didn't say. I feel like, yes, good faith is a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but it's also kind of a real thing, right? You're either actually trying to help someone or you're not.
Michael? I'm sorry, Mark?
Michael, can I ask you a question? I mean, this concern of Tyler's, is there a way to, in your view, to include I don't know, creating a standard, which again is going to be in the eye of the beholder? Maybe Scott has a brighter idea than I do, but it does seem to me that that could become a vicious circle without an end, and just waste people's time. So if you can give any thought to how that can be reined in. I mean, I'm not trying to be punitive, but I'm trying to avoid these individuals who may have vexatious, sort of perspective and are just trying to make things difficult for a local government. So that's the only thing I have that concerns me about this. Otherwise, I'd be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going out of turn, but since Mark asked me a question, I hope that's okay. I think one of the things I thought about is adding another good faith that applies to the person who's asking to reduce the fee. But that's the same good faith word we don't necessarily love, but maybe applying it to both sides is really just fair. I don't know. Otherwise, I'm happy to hear what others think. And also, really, if we don't have agreement on this, one of the things you didn't hear me say a lot last week when I voted against almost everything we added, Emily, is that I fear that we're making this thing bloat to the point that it's going to be harder to pass it, and we're going to be having fights about side things we're doing. So if we're not there on this, then I'm perfectly happy with moving on.
Scott, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have similar sentiments to what Michael just said, but I'll just say that I'm not really scared about the term good faith. I think if you're a public record holder and you're in a situation where they're not basically trusting that you're doing your job, you should be documenting what you're doing anyway. And when they ask the question, you can refer them to the numerous emails that you've sent on the topic to that point. So Just as a practitioner, good faith doesn't scare me. I think that's best practice. That's what we are encouraging people to do, and we want both sides to be in good faith. So on that front, that last sentence that Michael proposed doesn't worry me so much. But I also kind of echo what he just said, that I think we've talked about this for an hour in this meeting already.
Todd?
You know, good faith already shows up in the public records law, and I can't recall ever seeing it as the basis for litigation. I understand whenever we introduce any new standards, it could be subject to debate, and it's often only through litigation that sort of the boundaries of that term gets clarified. But I also agree with Scott that public bodies that are already doing this sort of know when to say, you know, we've answered you, you know, are you going to pay? Are you going to withdraw your request, and are capable of setting that bright line with requesters. But it's not a new term of art in, you know, the Oregon revised statutes or in the public records law. And I think it's a general understanding of how public bodies are supposed to operate anyway. So I don't think we're really adding a lot that's new here of concern, but I also understand why adding any new potentially amorphous mandate could be of concern to those who handle public records requests. And if this is more about the appetite of the legislature or concerns from your constituents that might prevent some of this stuff from getting passed, you know, maybe it is something we need to table for another time.
I was about to ask people if we could, in fact, vote on this, but I've seen more hands go up. No, Tyler and Steve. Okay, Steve, do you still want to say something before we vote on this Tyler language? No. Okay, so can I get a motion for adopting the language, just this: a public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee? Is that language that we all agree on?
I move that we adopt that language.
Second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand something, Emily. I thought we were talking about the full text that Michael put in the chat. Or we're only talking about one sentence of it?
So we were only talking about one sentence of it because the first two sentences are what people have been disagreeing about in the last hour of the meeting.
Okay, I got it.
Where there's
I got it.
There's an
I'm ready to
automatic
vote.
receipt or upon a request.
Got it. Okay.
I'm sorry, maybe I was on the road too much today, Emily. I'm still not following. What exactly are we trying to vote on here? And I apologize.
No problem. Clearly it's not, I'm not being clear. Okay, there is in the chat section of the meeting, Michael's put in some language in there that starts by saying a requester who has been notified of a fee may request an explanation, etc. The last sentence of that is not dealing with getting a itemized receipt. It's dealing with working in good faith to narrow the request. The first two sentences are about an itemized receipt, which is what there was disagreement about over the first hour of this meeting. So what I am proposing is we only figure out if we're on the same page for this last sentence: a public body shall work in good faith who seeks to narrow a request. And that would be language we would use instead of the language under the section of communication to reduce costs, which is on the shared screen. I'm happy to vote on all of it if people want to, but I was just hearing so much disagreement about whether we need an itemized receipt automatically or an itemized receipt upon request. I mean, that it's clearly there's not consensus on that. I think we could pass it on a vote, and I'm also happy to do that. Todd.
Thank you. I have concerns then if we merely go with this section, with this line, which I like. I think in and of itself, it's an important concept. If we then leave out that a public body can start the 60-day clock to closing a request after they've asked for clarification to a requester, if they in turn then don't answer the requester's attempts to clarify or narrow the request. I think that's an important idea because right now the public body has the authority to close a request. It's really one way, but often how can requesters clarify if they don't understand what a public body is doing or how it holds its records? It seems a little unfair and uneven to me. So I don't know if that's a second separate concept we want to vote on, or if you'd entertain a friendly amendment to add it to this existing sentence for the vote.
Sure, let's entertain a friendly amendment. So what would you propose and what are you pulling it from?
Good question. Okay, so I would utilize Michael's language from the chat, and I got to go back to it. So it would be the two. Oh,
Point of order. Do we not get a second? Isn't there a vote already pending? Sorry.
Sorry, it's just like the people are like, well, what are we voting on exactly and why? So is that, don't you have to clear that up before you can vote?
I don't know. Okay, so we don't have a vote pending. All right.
Well, we had a bunch of questions about what we're voting on, so it doesn't seem to make sense to make a vote, whether that's a point of order or not. It seems like it's not great communication. So where we're at right now is Todd wants to propose an amendment to not just vote on a public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee as language that we all endorse, but he wants to add something else to that. And Todd, what did you want to add?
well, it's the current sentence that comes after, although we will probably have to change the language if we're just going with these two concepts. The one that says, notwithstanding ORS 192.329, subsection 3, subsection A, the obligation of the public body to complete its response to the request is not suspended until the public body provides any explanation required by this section. So it would obviously have to connect with the previous concept of working in good faith with the requester who is asked to narrow a request, and that if the requester has done so, the public body would have to work with them in good faith to do so and can't start the 60-day clock to dismissing a request as if the requester has been non-responsive to the public body's request for clarification. If that makes sense, although I don't know necessarily the best way to put that into the language we're working on right now.
I don't particularly feel like that's a friendly amendment as the person who made the motion, just because it feels like it's adding a whole bunch of confusion and I don't even really understand anymore what we're talking about. So
what I was trying to do here was just get, and I'm sorry, Michael, I may have just stepped on your toes. What I was just trying to get us, like, do we agree on this concept? A public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request. Not excluding other concepts, not finalizing this as the only concept in this realm, but do we agree on this? That's all I wanted to get a sense of. In the end, it may not work without the whole thing about where the itemized fees come in and when you can close a request, but that's all I was trying to get a vote on.
yeah, I like the vote on that, and I just don't really feel like complicating it by adding this other thing about closing a request is super friendly. Honestly, I've not really heard anyone. I mean, we close requests after a while without specific statutory authority to do it, and no one has ever complained about that because we communicate with people before we do it, right? So I don't know. It doesn't feel like a friendly amendment to me. It feels like it's a not really related and maybe not really needed addition.
So I saw that as a question of clarification of what we are voting on. Does everybody feel clear now what we're voting on? No, Tyler doesn't feel clear. Okay, and Steve does feel clear. Okay, so what I'd like to vote on, which I think we do have a proposal to do, but entertain a second one, is whether we all endorse the language that a public body shall work in good faith with a requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee. That's not excluding other language here. It's not, excuse me, it would replace the language in the section called communication to reduce costs. It would get all boiled down to this, this sentence. It would not address the question of whether a public body needs to itemize a fee either automatically or provide reasonable understanding of what the breakdown of costs are upon request. Are people clear what we're voting on? Okay, so all in favor of whether we endorse this language, public body shall work in good faith with the requester who seeks to narrow a request in order to reduce a fee, please say aye or put your thumb up.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Aye.
Nay.
All right, congratulations, everybody. We've worked out one sentence we agree on. So next meeting, we'll go back to the public interest parts of things, and then I think we will have to circle back to the itemized fee to issue, whether we set it aside because it's too specific or whether we fold it in. I mean, we're gonna have to look at everything together in the end anyway. But as far as, let's see, we can have a couple minutes of public comment and then we need to.
Can I make one more motion, Chair?
Oh, of course, yeah.
I would like to move that we adopt the language in Todd's proposal that says that if you don't have your fee schedule either on your website or available on request, you can't charge a fee.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much for remembering
Two guys, we got two.
that. Okay, I just need to get this language. Todd, does the chat save or do I need to paste that somewhere?
I recommend pasting it.
All right, so I want to take some public comment. I see a couple of people's hands up, but Steve, did you have something you needed to add first?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just recognizing the amount of time that we spent talking about the itemization issue, and the amount of, the importance of the public interest discussion, which will include a discussion of requests for personal records. I'm really concerned about our ability to get to that business at the next meeting. So, I don't know if this is out of order, but I mean, I'd like to see right now whether it's possible to vote up or down on the itemization issue, one proposal or the other or both. I know, like, I don't want to forestall further future discussion, but actually I do want to forestall future discussion because I'm worried about things collapsing if we don't move forward, and drop things if they're, if we're just not there.
Okay, so you have a motion. Can you say do you want to vote? Do you want to state your
one? I'm happy to make a motion. I'll put it in the chat. It's the rest of what I said earlier,
right,
minus the one sentence we've already approved.
Okay. Is there a second to vote up and down on that?
Second.
Okay. So all in favor of adopting this language, this is not the automatic itemized request, right? It's just to be clear, I'm scrolling up to it on the screen. It is not how costs must be itemized. It is much closer to that Kessler language. All in favor of adopting this language, a requester who's been notified of a fee may request an explanation, in which case the public body shall provide an explanation completing its costs. It shall include sufficient detail to permit a reasonable person to understand the amount and purpose of the fee. And Michael has also pasted in the notwithstanding ORS 192, et cetera, the obligation of the public body to complete its response to the request is not suspended until the public body provides any explanation required by this segment. Okay, all in favor of that, adopting that language, please say aye or put your thumb.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed?
Nay.
Okay, it passes. So we've got 3 items of agreement. Great. We have a few minutes for public comment. Let me see if I can figure out who's here. Let's see. Mindy Lane, you had your hand up for a long time. You just took it down. Oh, no, you didn't. Do you want us to comment? If everybody could limit their comments to like a minute and a half, that'd be really great.
Emily, can you stop sharing your screen?
Of course. Thank you for reminding me. Mindy, go ahead, please.
Thank you for your time. Actually, I apologize. Do you mind actually sharing that screen? I did have my comment was related to section C.
Yep. Can you see it
And
now?
I don't have the document open. Yes.
There, do you have it see it now?
Okay, thank you for your time. My name is Mindy Lane. I work at Oregon Water Resources Department, Public Records. I support the first sentence of section C for public records requests that include email. The public body will work in good faith to establish time periods and keywords. That's something that our agency currently does. However, I'm concerned about the second half of that paragraph, as I know the language says the public body may offer, for example, to provide a log of responsive records revealing only email dates, senders, recipients, and subject lines. I'm concerned setting that precedent that's so specific. It's not uncommon for us to get tens of thousands of emails back, even when we have a narrow time frame and keywords. Especially when we're talking about duplicate emails. You know, our MS 365 application has a deduplication feature that will remove duplicate emails, but I've actually spent a lot of time making, you know, effectively a privilege log for certain requesters, but the deduplication tools aren't perfect. So, you know, if I send an email to 25 of my coworkers, technically none of them are duplicates because each recipient gets one. So if I send out an email to 25 people, it actually will show up 26 times. We don't have automated software that can remove the duplicate. So to make these logs is very time intensive. It could take days, depending on the number of emails, to manually remove the duplicates from it. So that was my comment. Again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And we just approved language that wouldn't include that C, but that, you know, there may be some specific guidance coming out of the PRA's office along these lines. So I'm sure that's helpful information to know. Let's see, Joe Barker, I think you had your hand up next. If you can limit your comments to 90 seconds, that'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Scott Stafer's best policy practice where, you know, it's an automatic given that, you know, if somebody comes in and makes a request, if somebody who's proficient in their job, they would know, okay, it would take about a half hour, 45 minutes. This is your cost. But in addition, a lot of these things that I hear being discussed today would appear to be an actual policy that the public body should have on record for the public itself to review. To me, the policy, the cost breakdown, whether it's for search, duplication, review, or all three, you know, this is the set price, lowest price hourly wage employee. This is it. You know, we have one lump sum for all three of these categories. If you want it broken down, that's a separate request type of thing. But the public policy must be given to the public straight up.
And I think that you'd be glad then to recognize that we did approve the language on this.
Yeah, one thing that I would correct though, just out of observation, on the communication to promote where it says effective date for this is January 1st, 2025. I would change that to 2024 because of that particular section 192.324 is being amended and becoming effective on 2024. So these changes would coincide with the changes that are being made then.
We'll have to make sure there's continuity in the whole proposal as it goes forward. Thanks for noticing that detail.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alan Kessler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be quick. With respect to the concerns about good faith standards, don't forget, please, that there's an AG hurdle and a DA hurdle from my point of view to get to court. There's also a court filing fee. You also have to find an attorney if you're not one usually. It's hard to get to court. Like, people aren't going to frivolously do that. So the the city, I think, has to act in really bad faith before it has any real risk of being dinged, or the public body rather, before it has any real risk of being dinged. Let's see. My proposal wasn't intended actually to replace communication. It sounds like you kind of all got there. I really liked section D especially. I think the things that it lists are things that public bodies should be required to provide. I think we can fix most of that by eliminating exemption 192.34515, which relates to software, source code, and computer manuals. It's really old language. I think it was written in the 80s, that amendment, and software was really different then. I think you should be able to get the Excel manual or the Office 365 manual, and right now that's specifically exempted under the law. If you could start to get those things like database manuals and things under the public records law, then it wouldn't need to be a special, you just, you know, if they don't give it to you, then you start requesting the manuals for how they get there. I don't think that my proposal is actually inconsistent with Todd's proposal. I think that Todd's proposal has the risk of malicious compliance, so you'll get a really bureaucratic response that will give you 6 cells that will give you the numbers and they'll be meaningless. So having this hook where you can stop the city's clock and they can't say, or where you can stop them from having completed the request so you can get to an appeal if they're not responding to you, I think is important. I keep saying city because I'm very single-minded in my focus right now, public body. But I think that, you know, the information that Todd wants to gather is, I think we should have that. I also think that cities will be, like, public bodies will be forced, if they're being requested for these materials, to do it, because they've still only got 15 days. They're going to start to do it prospectively. Mark's asleep, I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your comments, and there'll be places to potentially, you know, reflect those in our future meetings. So just as far as the calendar goes, we have a meeting scheduled for next Friday. So the main thing to do there is return to some of the public interest language. And then ideally we'd have something we'd have some cobbled together piece of legislation. When are we supposed to bring it back to the full PRAC? Oh, Mark, sorry.
We currently have a meeting scheduled in November. So unless we try to meet sooner than that, it'll be November 18th at 1 p.m.
Okay, because this says our goal here is also to submit revisions to Legislative Council by October 31st, which we clearly can't do if we're not meeting till November. Mark, you have your hand up. You're muted. I'm sorry.
Wanted to thank the members of the public for contributing to the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Michael?
Just wanting to remind you guys, I'm not going to be at our meeting next week. I don't have any concerns with our public interest formulation, though, so that feels pretty good. I think one thing you guys are going to talk about, and I won't get to vote on it, but just sharing my feelings whether the DA or the AG should be able to review this like everything else, and I think there's no reason we should treat it any differently than anything else in the public records law. So hopefully you guys get there, but I will miss you, and I think we've done incredible work in this subcommittee, so thank everyone for that.
Great, thank you. We'll miss you too. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
Michael, knowing that you're not going to be there, I think that question about appeals is probably one of the outstanding issues for me. I'm wondering whether there's anything you could provide in writing by way of your perspective on Todd's proposal to specifically state that AG and DA have appeal power versus not including that in the proposal. Is that something that you could submit, would feel comfortable?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So we'll meet next Friday. We'll try to get through the public interest stuff. Between me and Todd, we'll get out some language that, like, what we've got so far and specifically what we're talking about next week by Monday. So hopefully people will have time to review it. Any other questions or concerns before then? And then I guess November 4th is our meeting with the full PRAC to try to take this back there. Is that right? Or what's the date on that?
18th.
Okay. All right. You guys who deal with legislative council more, are we totally messed up on deadlines? I mean, if we don't get language to legislative council till November, I know we can amend stuff in committee, but is there any guidance or advice there, Tyler?
It feels like we're running a little late. Do we have confirmation that Senator Thatcher's office has put a placeholder in the hopper?
Yeah, 4, I think, right? Todd? Yeah.
4,
Okay.
although we'll talk at the full PRAC meeting. I've requested one of them for my own budget concerns, but that doesn't mean we can't put more than one concept in as well.
Cool. Yeah, it feels like based on the other conversations I've been having, the sooner we can actually agree on something, I just think the greater our chances are of having something early in the session. The benefit is it's a long session. Things can be introduced during the session. We have a little more wiggle room than usual, but I imagine something of this magnitude, if it looks like it wasn't, ready to go out the starting gate, I'm worried that we're going to have trouble just meeting legislative deadlines.
I don't know if there's not a lot we can do about the PRAC schedule. So I guess that just, reinforces, let's try to get it done next week. And then there'll be a little bit of time that if we have to fine tune something at the full PRAC, there'll be a little bit of time to review things. But yeah, I guess that's all I can really say on that. Any other, Michael, do you still have your hand up or did you forget to take it down? Michael Crone, not hearing you. I'm assuming you forgot to take it down. Okay, I think that covers everything we can do today. I know we're a little over, and thank you everyone for that and all your hard work and patience today. Motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Okay.